Hi, it's Ashley from Sweet Dreams Bake Shop, and welcome back to my channel where I make a lot of cake and cookie decorating tutorials as well as give a lot of baking business tips. And as per usual, there will be a pricing guide at the end of this video. And I must apologize for my voice. It's just a little bit dry. This happens every single time at the beginning of the school year. I'm just not used to speaking and singing as much as I'm going to be doing in the next few months now, so I apologize. But let's get into this tutorial. So I'm personally going with mainly fake tears for this. My friends requested that they wanted a primarily fake cake and just a real cake at the top so that they could enjoy it as a couple, and everybody else at the wedding was going to eat other desserts that they had to offer. Needless to say, the cake really was all about the look, and my friend really wanted a vintage vibe to her cake, and I was so excited when she asked me to do some vintage piping on it because when I first started getting into wedding cakes, one of the very first things I did was I created this vintage lace pattern on the cake, and it looked not very nice at all, so this was kind of my redemption cake. Now, these are admittedly some of the ugliest fake tears that I've ever covered, but I was working with a really limited amount of supplies. There kind of have been supply issues all over the place, and I've been incredibly busy, so I haven't been able to go out and get cake supplies. So I kind of had to use what I already had on hand. What I did first was I covered everything with some shortening on the outside of those styrofoam tears, and then I went ahead and tried my best to cover them in fondant. Now, these top tiers are a lot better because I was using brand new styrofoam, but the other tiers were reused from another cake, so they were looking a little bit rough. Now, depending on what you're doing, you can definitely reuse your tiers over and over again, but at some point, they do kind of reach an expiration in which you can't reuse them anymore. Now, if you want a little bit more of an in-depth and slowed down look on how to actually cover a styrofoam cake with fondant, then you can go ahead and check out this live tutorial that I did in the right-hand corner. Now comes the fun part where I get to pipe on the lace. Now there's a few different techniques that I use for this. I'm using royal icing today, but if you are actually serving this as a fully real cake, I kind of recommend that you do this with buttercream instead. I just find it's just nicer on the outside because that's what you're having on the inside, and sometimes the royal icing can just taste like sugar. But since this is going to be a display cake, I'm going fully in with this royal icing, and I'm using a very thick consistency. Now, it's thick to the point where it still flows out relatively easily and it's not too dry, but it's not so thin that it's dripping down everywhere either. You'll notice I'm using a tipless piping bag. I used to use metal tips all of the time, and they honestly just gave me such a big headache. This way, if I ever do run into an issue where I get a clog, I can get it out of that bag super easily and don't have to bother washing any tips out. Now, I know that there was a big jump there in that lace pattern. I am going to be showing you what I'm doing here, which is basically just brushing out that royal icing using a little bit of water, and I like to use a flat edge paintbrush. Now, if you don't like the brushed look, then by all means skip that. You could have just left it as clean lines like I originally had it. I just find that it gives it a little bit more of a lacy look, and it's a lot more forgiving if you don't feel comfortable piping directly onto a cake. It takes a lot of practice to be able to do that. So if you're kind of starting out and you want that lacy look, highly recommend the brushed royal icing technique. And my biggest word of advice for this is to actually look at a real lace pattern and kind of see which parts of the pattern you like, and you can pick and choose. I really just looked at something for reference and then I kind of went with it. There is no specific way to pipe the lace. Now, originally I wasn't planning on having any border, but I love mixing mediums and I wanted to add a little bit more depth, so I decided to use this mold, which has a bunch of really great greenery all over it, and I felt like it added some texture without changing the vibe of the cake too much. So I decided to add that onto a few tiers. What you're seeing I'm doing here is I really didn't have a specified plan for where I was going to put this lace. I know that I wanted it essentially in the middle, but then I decided to add different appliques all over the cake, really to give it that beautiful look on all sides of the cake, no matter where you looked at it from. I should also mention that to attach all of these styrofoam tiers together, you can go ahead and just get out your hot glue gun and that'll do the trick. Now, if you don't want to use hot glue or maybe you don't have any, you can also just stick a dowel right through the center of everything and make sure that it is attached maybe by some royal icing, or I also like to use candy melts as well. And moving along to our real tier, I'm just using some vanilla cake here. This is my tried and true recipe that I always use, and I'm just removing that bottom. By the way, if you guys are going to invest in new pans anytime soon, really look for the ones that have that removable bottom. I have a bunch that don't have the removable bottom, but I find that when you have that, you avoid a lot of issues with getting that cake out of the pan. And I'm using Italian meringue buttercream today and using a sugar syrup as well. Sugar syrup is basically a 1-to-1 ratio using hot water and granulated sugar, and then you just pour it in between. I especially like to use this with wedding cakes because you never know when things are actually going to be fully consumed on that day, and it really just helps to lock in that moisture. One little wedding cake tip is to make sure that you put that in the fridge, and I like to put mine in the fridge overnight, just to make sure that everything is really solidified, because if you're having a summer wedding, it can get really, really warm, or if you just live in a warm climate, it can get warm and then you start to get edges leaking out and all of that stuff. So I really like to make sure that everything is nice and solidified before actually putting it onto a wedding cake. I always use a little bit of shortening in my fondant when I knead it all together. That way it makes this process really easy and you get way less elephant skin and breakage. And then go ahead and use those fondant smoothers, and this is a really small cake, so I'm able to just flip it upside down and really smooth out those edges. And hello to my hair. And then we really want to make sure that we're getting this done with 2 smoothers. I used to do this job with just one, and I found that it just never got it smooth enough. Now time for some really quick roses. You know, I've made roses now in many different ways, and I always go back to this way every single time. I find that there are some roses that do turn out a little bit more refined, but I just love the way these look so full and they're so effortless. You're really just taking this, cutting it out, making sure you're thinning out that fondant on the edge with the balling tool, and make sure you have that foam mat underneath. Then you're going to take a little bit of water, fold it in half, and then you're essentially rolling it. Now it does take some finesse to get this rolling part right, but once you get it, it is incredibly easy. The biggest thing is you want to make sure that the petals travel downwards. So when you open up the flower, those outer petals stay on the outside and the center of the flower is more downward. Now, if you have the luxury, I always say put that real tier on at the last moment, especially if your particular cake fridge can't actually fit this many tiers inside. And yeah, you can totally put styrofoam and fondant into the fridge and nothing is going to happen, but I just don't have enough room. So I generally try to leave it to the last minute, or I really refrigerate that cake for a long time so that when it does come out, there's no chance of leakage. What I also love about doing roses the way that I did them is that I don't need to wait for them to dry. They're ready to go. There's enough of a fondant base on the bottom that they can stick onto a cake really, really easily. I would say they're a very hardy fondant flower. It's hard to break them and to mess them up. So you can go right ahead and directly place that on. And in order to match my friend's flowers, I just airbrushed that with a little bit of green. You could use petal dust though if you don't own an airbrush machine. Now let's get into the pricing of this cake. I asked you guys how much you would charge for this cake or how much you would pay for this cake, and many people came close, but pretty much under the mark. This would be $1,200 Canadian. Remember, it's not always about just the supplies or just the time. It is about your skill level too, which I know is very tricky to try and guess at, but it just takes time. Now let's get into the subscriber submission of the video, and I thought it was so fitting to share another stunning wedding cake with beautiful piping work as well. And if you want to be the next featured subscriber submission of the video, then please follow me at SD Bake Shop on Instagram, where you can either tag me in a photo or send me a photo. Any and all dessert levels are welcome. Thanks so much for watching, guys. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so you can be part of the Sweetie fam. Right now, I'm uploading weekly, so make sure you hit that notification bell so you know when I upload. Also, be sure to comment, request, or ask a question. I love hearing from you guys, and if you need more Sweet Dreams Bake Shop, then head over to my second channel where you can subscribe for more vlog and savory content. Bye!